You are listening to the Loida Lewis podcast, hosted by Loida Nicolas Lewis. She's a trailblazing businesswoman, leader, philanthropist, and the widow of Reginald F. Lewis, the visionary leader who was the first African American to build $1 billion company. With unparalleled determination, Loida Lewis has not only excelled as a successful attorney, but also shaped a $1 billion empire. Following the untimely passing of her husband, Reginald F. Lewis, she took the helm of TLC Beatrice, carving her legacy as a successful business leader. Be inspired and learn from her as she shares her wisdom, the secrets to her success in both business, in love, and in life. Let's live, love, laugh, and learn. With your host, Miss Loida Lewis.
Hello, my name is Loida Lewis, and I'm so glad you're tuning in. Since I published my book, my memoir, Why Should Guys Have All the Fun? An Asian American story of love, marriage, motherhood, and running $1 billion empire. And with this podcast, whether you bought or have not bought my book, I'd like to reach you and tell you life's lesson. So this is Loida Lewis Podcast. Live, love, laugh, and learn with me. I'm doing this podcast because I know that it's the fastest way to reach young people, people who are not so young, people who are experiencing life's challenges, and most of all, people who are like me, senior citizen. The best way now is no longer radio, but podcast. And it sprang from my desire to teach because at 80 years old, I have lots of experience and life lessons to share with you. So I hope you'll tune in. But for those who do not know me or who have not yet bought my book, Why Should Guys Have All the Fun? Then let me introduce myself. In the Filipino community or in the Filipino diaspora all over the world, I'm known as Loida Nicolas Lewis. Well, as you can see from my accent, I'm an immigrant. I am not born in the United States. I was born in the Philippines. And for many of you who are listening, maybe your parents, maybe you yourself have come to the United States to experience it, to visit, to find a good job, to raise your family. And like me, you fell in love. And that's why I want to be sort of your tita, your auntie, who can answer your questions. So you can send it to askloidalewis@gmail.com. And I'll try to answer you either on this podcast or in whatever way you send your questions. As I wrote in chapter 1 of my book, Why Should Guys Have All the Fun? I was born in Sorsogon of very entrepreneurial parents. My father was orphaned when he was 12 and lived with a rich uncle. That's customary in the Philippines. And from that uncle who was very entrepreneurial, he for himself had great ambition. He also would be a businessman. And so as we were growing up, my father, from being orphaned, living with a rich uncle, was very successful. And he was able to build in the Philippines, in that little town, a movie house named after me, Loida Theater, lumberyard, fish pond, bowling alley, construction, and a gasoline station. And so with that success, we have a biggest house in Sorsogon. And every evening, during the weekend, he would give us lessons in life. I would call it now brainwashing. But then, it really is change of values. And from him, I learned hard work, perseverance, determination, thrift, or how to manage money, and faith in God. So that reflects in my life now, things that I learned when I was growing up. And from there, because he wanted me to follow him in his ambition to be a lawyer, he did not become a lawyer. So I went to University of the Philippines College of Law. We call that Harvard of the Philippines. Unfortunately, although I was salutatorian in grade school, valedictorian in high school, cum laude in college, couldn't make it in UP. My classmates were so good, so I was only number 7 in our graduating class. And when I passed the bar, my father sent me on a round-the-world trip with my mother to pick up my sister here in New York City, Columbia University, taking her master's. And that's where destiny took a turn. My sister was dating my boss, and my boss said, I'll fix you a blind date, Loida, because I'm going out with your sister. Let's have a double date. And that's it. Destiny took a turn. I met Reginald Lewis, the love of my life. We were married 6 months later. Yes, it was fast. But sometimes when you know you have met your life partner, make the decision. Leave everything. Go with your heart. Use your head, but go with your heart. Mr. Lewis came to the Philippines to marry me because I came to the United States as a tourist visa. When we decided to get married, I had second thoughts. Why? Because marrying an American, a foreigner, as far as I'm concerned, means leaving my country, leaving my parents and family and my friends, my father's entire ambition for me to be a politician, maybe become a senator all the way. So I told my fiancé then, darling, I can't go through with it. Oh, he was brokenhearted, and so was I. So on the way back to the Philippines, I was so miserable that I said, all right, I'll coming back. And so Mr. Lewis had to marry me in the Philippines, and we were leaving for the United States right after marriage. When we arrived in Honolulu, I was questioned by the immigration. How long are you going to stay in the United States? I said truthfully, permanently, I just got married. Oops, wrong thing to say. Because my visa was a tourist visa. That means I lied before the American embassy. But I never appeared. So after 1 year, they gave me my green card. And in my mind, all Filipinos, I am smart, I'm a lawyer, and I got stopped at the border. And so I said, that's what I will be, an immigration lawyer. And then, because I was already a lawyer in the Philippines, the United States law says you cannot take the bar examination as a lawyer unless you are an American citizen. But in 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court made a decision. Citizenship has nothing to do with being a good lawyer. Yes. So immediately I applied to take the bar in New York because UP, University of the Philippines College of Law, was founded in 1908 in the Philippines by American government. So New York Bar says graduates of UP, University of the Philippines College of Law, they do not need to study in the United States. It's considered a law school equal to an American law school. Took the bar, passed it, and so I became a lawyer. Now, being a lawyer, the first time by a Filipina, so I always claim I'm the first Filipino, I'm the first Asian to pass the New York bar without studying in the United States. From there, I said, I have to work with Immigration and Naturalization Service because when I first came, my first problem was immigration. I almost couldn't come in after being married to an American, Reginald Lewis. When there were 11 positions in immigration, I applied immediately. But then, after 1 year of waiting, I learned I was not taken among the 11. I said, why? I'm good. So the only way to find out that I have not been discriminated against is to sue immigration, INS, now it's called CIS, for discrimination. Discrimination was because of my national origin, because of my race, and because I'm a woman. It took 3 months. We had a hearing before an administrative judge when the immigration failed to produce the FS 171. That is their application. So that it could be compared to mine. They did not produce it. That's their fault. So the judge said, even if I cannot see the qualifications of those 11, just look at the record. And then he enumerated how good that was. Aside from being able to speak 3 languages, of course, English, Filipino, and Spanish. So they said, she has been discriminated against. The government gave me 3 years back pay, 2 months vacation leave. And so I was in. Mr. Lewis was a practicing lawyer. And at the beginning, it was difficult. He had to hustle a lot, come home late. But always when he comes home, it's not, oh, you're late again. No, it's always, darling, are you hungry? Because I know he's out there fighting dragons and monsters. When he comes back home, he should not meet another dragon in the house. So that's how I navigated that. Aside from when he gets angry with me and all the SHIT and the FUCK comes out, I keep quiet. Why? Because I hear Papa and Mama when I was growing up. And there was this back and forth and back and forth. They cannot seem to understand what each one was talking. And so for myself, I said, I will never have that. So I just keep my mouth shut, even if I'm answering him in my mind. And what did he say? I know what that silence is. That's aggressive silence. And so it was only later on that I was able to modify my response. And how did I do that? By understanding what true love is. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not keep a record of wrong. Love always supports. Love never dies. And so that changed me. But before that, our beginning years was rough because we decided since I was working, I will take care of the household expenses. And he would take care of the mortgage, the children's private education, vacationing in the Caribbean, skiing in Aspen, Colorado. Since the money comes from my salary as an immigration lawyer, I could not balance my checkbook when I would visit and buy pork chops at the butcher and I would buy our groceries at the supermarket. I'll issue a check, not a credit card, but a check. And then invariably after a few days, the butcher or the supermarket manager would call me, Mrs. Lewis, your check bounced. Bounced! And at that time in the 1970s, you could still return the check or you could ask them to deposit it the second time. Second time, it bounced again. And they would return it to me and I would say, all right, here's the cash. So I would have at least 1 inch of return checks, uncollected funds, insufficient funds. And I'm glad I never told Mr. Lewis because he would be so angry that I have this bad credit. And in fact, finally, I had to tell him I had a bad credit because his own credit was affected. So those are our travails and tribulation as we were young married couple. But when he started to buy his first company, McCall Pattern Company, that's when we started to say, all right, no more tenants. Since we bought a brownstone with his first big legal case in 1970, by the time 1984 came, we occupied the entire brownstone that we had. So you can say that our beginning years, like any young married couple, were tough. But I learned how to balance my budget eventually. When we got married, we have always confirmed that we will have a family. And so when I started to crave for lobster, which was very unusual. I love lobster, but just to crave for it, that means something was happening. And our OBGYN, Dr. Burke, confirmed that I was pregnant with our first child. And Mr. Lewis always knew it's going to be a girl. So he had already named her Leslie. Leslie meaning it could be a boy or a girl. Because at that time, before the Me Too movement, when you apply and your name is surely a girl, they may not take you. It was very hard still during the 1970s for a woman who is a lawyer, who is a doctor, to find a job. So Mr. Lewis said, all right, her name will be Leslie. She was born on February 10 in the Philippines. February 11 is the feast of Our Lady of Lourdes. Lourdes actually for the French, Lourdes for the Filipinos. Leslie Lourdes Nicolas Lewis was our first girl. And I remember I did not feel the pain because I was exercising Lamaze. I was doing the Lamaze method. No pain. And when she came out, she was placed beside me. She looked at me as if asking, "Are you my mother?" So she was our first daughter. For 7 years, she was an only child. And then Christina came along. She came along when I started to love the smell of coffee. It was so good. It's different from all the coffees that I have been drinking before. Just the smell of coffee makes me realize there might be somebody coming along. And that is our second daughter, Christina Savilla, who is the grandmother of Mr. Lewis. Nicholas, my maiden name, Lewis, our second child. She came 7 years later after Leslie. We as parents didn't say, you have to be perfect. No, only two things. Do your work, meaning as a student, study well, do your best. And second is respect your parents, respect your elders. No shouting back. Whatever we say, unless we are really unreasonable, you have to follow. Obey your parents. Fourth commandment, honor and obey your parents. And for myself, I read to my daughters every day, even when they were babies, until they were every night I would read them, whatever we select, both of us, and it only ended when they could read it themselves. You have to be very attentive to your children. I made the mistake sometimes of not listening, but listening to them is crucial in their growing up. And so at the end, I could say that Leslie graduated from Harvard, and so with Christina, and both of them graduated with honors cum laude. And now they are doing their own thing, doing business. For Leslie, she calls it multi-generational black, teaching African Americans how to invest in the stock market. Some people did not even dare, even if they have masters in education, her own cousin. And Christina decided she will have family office for African Americans, people of color who are high net worth, meaning to say they have lots of money because they have sold their business and they don't know quite what to do with it. How did I fall in love with this man, an African American named Reginald Lewis? Well, when I met him on a blind date and got to know him, I find out I was ambitious, but he was more ambitious. I am intense, but he was more intense. I am driven. He was more driven. Type A, he's triple A. And most of all, he loved me. So, I knew that he was ambitious, but I did not know he was going to become the richest black man in America in 1987 when he bought and purchased on borrowed money, almost borrowed money, $1 billion. Then he became the first black man to acquire, to manage, and to own a $1 billion company, Beatrice International Foods, made up of 64 companies in 31 countries. When Mr. Lewis bought Beatrice International Foods in 1987, a $1 billion multinational, multicultural food company, we decided to live in Paris. And so I quit INS, now called CIS, and lived in Paris. But Since I was not working, what should I do? I said, I have all this knowledge of 10 years of being an immigration lawyer. Let me write the book, How to Get a Green Card. And it's still being printed, 15th edition, after 25 years. But before that, I also wrote a book for Filipino veterans of World War II, How to Become a Citizen. Because in 1990, the United States Supreme Court passed a law that Filipino veterans of World War II can become an American citizen. All of that was while we were in Paris. You will read in my book how we were living the life of the rich and the famous. We moved to Paris. We vacationed in the south of France. We had two chauffeurs, one for Mr. Lewis, one for myself. We had a 25-room apartment in Paris. He had his own private jet. He had this billion-dollar company. He was part of the Forbes, the richest 400 CEOs of the United States. And then it all came crashing down when suddenly he could not see on his right eye. He could not see. He could not walk. Something was wrong. And it was cancer of the brain. And there was no remedy, no Western remedy. Chemotherapy, he didn't want that. No radiation, he didn't want that. And so within 2 weeks, Mr. Lewis died after the diagnosis. For those of you who have experienced death in the family, you know what it is. It's suddenly the sun stops shining. Suddenly life stopped. And I was totally in grief, in profound pain and loss. But I am so thankful that I was raised Catholic, I was Christian, because I never lost faith in God. I know that God will not abandon me, that He holds me in the palm of His hand, and that I will not be orphaned. It took me time. And so for all of those who suffer failure or death of a loved one, yes, be natural, weep, cry, shed tears, be angry, be totally discombobulated as I was. But tears flow in the night, but joy comes in the morning. And so that's what happened to me. Around 6 months later, I could finally say the Our Father. Thy will be done, Lord. Thy will be done. And I started looking. Got to get myself together and say, what do we have here? And so for all of those of you who are listening, when you encounter disaster, disappointment, death of a loved one, yes, it's natural to mourn. It's natural to be angry. It's natural to stop breathing for a while. But don't despair, because God holds you in the palm of His hand. Because that's what happened to me. And that's where I decided I will finish the book. That's why I decided I will take care of my 2 daughters. I will be mother and father to them. When I decided I would take over, rather than select somebody else to be CEO, I became the CEO. And why is that? Because Mr. Lewis was so smart to have 51% of the company. And so if anybody didn't want to go with me and vote for me, I could write him off. As chair and CEO, I had to prepare myself. So for all of those who are listening, when an opportunity comes to you, don't say, oh, I'm not ready. Or don't say, I am not qualified. If it came along your way, that means somebody thought that you are qualified. Or even if you think you are not qualified, go for it. Apply. Because you never know all the hidden talents you have unless you seize it. Once you say you can't do it, you already failed. In your mind, you already failed. You can't do it. So when an opportunity comes, take it. Yes, you're afraid, but you can do it. You can do it. You can give birth. You can be better by doing it differently than any man. What do you remember? There is a song, right? On Annie, Get Your Gun. Whatever he can do, I can do better, but I'm not saying I can do better. We can do it, but differently because we are women. So when I decided to take over, I guess because I'm the first Asian American to take over a CEO with majority control of a multi-million dollar company, I was able to stop the bankruptcy because we were almost going to bankruptcy. And within the 7 years that I ran it, we increased the income more than when I took over. And so in the seventh year, we decided to liquidate the company. Why? By selling companies one at a time, we have lots of cash. And for shareholders, if I distribute it as dividends, Uncle Sam is going to tax each one of us 40%. But if I liquidate the company, meaning sell the company, the capital gains, not income tax, but capital gains is 20%. So it was a no-brainer. I've got to sell the whole thing. And I sold Peace, the supermarket business first, the ice cream company in Italy, Spain, Germany, France, Canary Islands, and then the bottling company in Belgium, potato chips company in Ireland, the beverage company in Thailand. I sold them all. Took 7 years. But in the end, we paid down the leverage buyout debt that I inherited, $350 million, paid it, zero debt. And by selling it, I recovered $1 billion. So when I took over TLC Beatrice International Holdings Inc., I was on the cover of Working Woman magazine. And being an Asian, the first Asian American woman to run a $1 billion company. Ever since we liquidated the company, I was free. And so I decided that it was time to do the things that I couldn't do while I was running the company. And what is that? Running the Reginald F. Lewis Foundation. Because 10% of Mr. Lewis' wealth went to the foundation. In keeping with the Jewish Christian tradition of 1/10 of your income should go to charitable causes, meaning to say give it away 10%. It doesn't belong to you. Giving to the church, giving to those causes that I believe should be helped. So since that time, Mr. Lewis wrote down that several things should receive the largesse or the charity from his foundation. And one of that is $5 million to an African American Museum of History and Culture. And 10 years later, in 2002, the Baltimore legislature allocated $32 million to build an African American Museum of History and Culture. Same name that Mr. Lewis wrote down. So when we met with the chairman of the committee to establish the African American Museum of History and Culture, and he heard $5 million, he said, for that amount of money, we will name the museum after him. Why? Because the provision in the law, no money will be sent out unless the African American community raised $3 million. And here was the foundation offering $5 million. So Mr. Lewis, even in death, did a leverage buyout, which is buying or having a museum named after him that cost $32 million for $5 million. I have to add that Sorsogon, the province where I was born and grew up, was considered 25, 30 years ago to be in the bottom third of poorest provinces out of 84. And so education is the key out of poverty. I thought that the best way to help my fellow Sorsogonans is to start a school in Sorsogon. We incorporated the Lewis College, TLC. A lot of students have graduated since then, and 90% have a job, instant middle class. And the other largesse of the Reginald F. Lewis Foundation is Harvard Law School, because it's allowed Mr. Lewis to enter Harvard Law School without even applying when he was such a student during a summer program in 1965. So Mr. Lewis also allocated $3 million before he died, and I fulfilled that. So Harvard Law School has a building named after the first African American to have a building named after him, Reginald F. Lewis International Law Center. Last year, we celebrated the 35th year of the Reginald F. Lewis Foundation, and we added up all the monies that has been given away, $35 million. Mr. Lewis was writing his book, Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun? But he died before he could finish it. So I was able to find a co-writer, Blair Walker, who finished it. And the subtitle of Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun is How Reginald Lewis Created a $1 billion Business Empire. I promoted the book for the past 25 years. But after 25 years, I said, I'm only chapter 6 in his book. Why should I not write my own story? And that's why I chose the title, Why Should Guys Have All the Fun? Mr. Lewis' book is part 1. I'm part 2. What do I do in my spare time? Oh, I am a grandmother of 5. So I also have what we call in the Filipino apostolic mission, because in the Filipino language, grandchildren is called apo. And so when you spend time with your grandchildren, it's an apostolic mission. So I have 5 beautiful, good-mannered, and lovely grandchildren. I am blessed. In the coming episodes of this podcast, I would like you to tune in because I will be talking about how to manage your money. I'll talk about many of the questions that when I've been going around promoting my book, Why Should Guys Have All the Fun? How do you look so young? So I'll talk about that. I'll also talk about how you can find your life partner, because I did, and so many other things. So I hope you can email me if you have any questions. Ask loidalewis@gmail.com or tune in into my podcast, Loida Lewis Podcast. Live, laugh, learn, and love with me.
The Loida Lewis Podcast, hosted by Loida Lewis, is produced by the creators of Over a Glass or Two, Jesse and JV. Executive produced by Loida Nicolas Lewis. Rate and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for a chance to be featured on a future episode. Have a question for Miss Loida? Just email us on askloidalewis@gmail.com. Your question might make its way to a future episode. Subscribe on all major platforms to never miss a beat. Thank you for listening to the Loida Lewis Podcast. Let's live, love, laugh, and learn together